Hello, students. This is Mr. Martyr. I'm coming to you with a flip classroom on the Roman Empire. So in the first part of our discussion, we talked about the Roman Republic, and we talked about the great general Cincinnatus and compared him to George Washington. Now we talked a little bit about Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus. Well, now we're going to talk about Rome during the Pax Romana, and we're going to talk about the legacy of Rome and some of the structural marvels of Rome, and we're also going to talk about the decline of Rome. So the first thing we want to talk about is this period called the Pax Romana. And the Pax Romana is the time period when Roman law is developed and clarified. People have certain legal rights. The key phrase that you want to associate, it's called civis Romanus. I am a Roman citizen. And this meant that the full might of the Roman Republic would protect the Roman citizens. So if anyone was wandering the countryside and they were in trouble, they would just simply say, Civis Romanus, I am a citizen of Rome, and that meant that they were to be unharmed. Also during this time period, people were innocent until proven guilty. So life during the Pax Romana was pretty profound, as people had certain rights that differentiated them from other people outside the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire at this time is roughly 4,000 miles long, so it's very hard to keep control over that empire. And Rome has roughly about 300,000 troops that are stationed throughout its provinces that protect it. It's also during this time period that Jesus Christ is alive. So one of the things that's always interesting is that, we read about the Western religions, and we learn about these people as religious figures, but they're also historical figures in the story of us. So one of the other things during the Pax Romana that I want to focus on is religion. So we know that Jesus was a Jew who was born in the province of Judea. We know that he historically was known to be a threat to the Romans and considered by some to be a troublemaker. And for that, he was arrested. He was executed by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and killed. He was crucified. His followers, called disciples, after his death, spread throughout Judea and the rest of the Roman Empire, trying to spread the word of God. They tried to spread what's called Christianity. For the early part of Christianity's existence, it was actually outlawed by the Roman Empire, and it wasn't until the Emperor Constantine, allegedly on his deathbed, saw, a cloud that appeared in the shape of a cross, that he actually made the official religion of the Roman Empire to be Christianity, and that is a huge revolutionary turning point. So Rome will be the center of the Catholic Church from the 500s all the way up to, really, we're looking at through the Middle Ages up to the 1500s with the Renaissance. So the Catholic Church is very profound and very important during this time. So some of the things that I want you guys to understand, and again, I'm not giving you an in-depth study of the history of Rome, but some of the things that I want you to remember about it is that they had a republican form of government. They elected representatives to make decisions for them. This is different from ancient Greece, because ancient Greece, as we know, was the world's first direct democracy. Additionally, they had the 12 tables where certain citizens had rights, civis Romanus. Latin was their official language. We talked about that yesterday. It was home to the Roman Catholic Church. Also, city planning was profoundly important. When you sit down to plan a city, the most important thing that you want to do is develop sewer systems. And in fact, they had an aqueduct system, they had watering, and they had a great engineering system. So when a lot of people think of ancient Rome, they're thinking, wow, these guys, it was so long ago, how could they possibly be advanced? But in fact, the Romans were quite advanced with their engineering and their planning. Additionally, they had aqueducts to provide fresh water, they had sewage systems, they had dams to provide water, and they had cement, which meant they were able to build roads, which are still present to this day. Also, their biggest achievement was the arch. I don't want to say their biggest achievement. One of the greatest architectural achievements is the arch, and that enables them to build the Colosseum. So on your exam or whenever people are looking at ancient structures, remember that the Colosseum is a Roman structure. It's not Greek, but it's built off of this concept of the Roman arch. And the Roman arch, or the arch itself, supports itself. So this Colosseum was it's the equivalency of a stadium. There were gladiator fights. There was also indoor plumbing in the Colosseum. You got a ticket, so they gave you a little stub which had a row and number on it. They could flood the Colosseum, so there were naval battles inside. So it was quite impressive in its day. It was kind of the center of entertainment during the Roman Empire. Another structure that you need to be concern yourself with is the Roman Pantheon. This is known as the first domed building. This is the first domed building. Remember, this is Pantheon, Pantheon, not Parthenon. Parthenon is in the Acropolis in Athens. The Pantheon is the first domed building ever. It's a pretty neat structure. The Pantheon also resembles some of the buildings in the United States. Again, throughout this lecture, throughout this discussion, I'm trying to compare Rome with the United States. So architecturally, there are some similarities. Here on the left is our Supreme Court building, and on the right is the Pantheon. And here's a cross-sectional study of the Pantheon. This is a painting of what the Pantheon was. So again, it's a domed building that has an open rooftop. And again, the ceiling supports itself. This was tremendously impressive. It was a modern marvel for its time. Now, one of the questions that you're probably asking is, what happens if it rains? Well, you can't tell by this painting, but the floor of the Pantheon is in fact domed or bowed. So if any moisture precipitation did end up in the floor of the Pantheon, it would meet in the middle and go into a drain, which then went into the Roman sewer systems. It was quite remarkable for its time. The Pantheon bears resemblance to this room, or this room, I should say, is modeled off of the Pantheon. This room is known as the Rotunda. It's in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. This is where Congress and the Senate meet. This photo was taken at the funeral of President Ronald Reagan. You can see his flag cover casket right at the bottom of the screen. But focusing upward is this beautiful dome. Arches support the window columns. And then you've got the superstructure up top. Here is what the top of the Pantheon looks like if you were standing in the middle of it. Whereas the Pantheon is open in the middle, compared with this image, if you're standing in the middle of the Rotunda, you see this image, where again, there is the Capitol dome, again, supported by the Roman, I call them the Roman arches, but the arches of the windows, and you're looking up at this painting. This painting is called The Apotheosis of George Washington. Again, throughout the lectures and throughout the classes, I've been comparing Greece to America, Rome to America. We compared George Washington as the American Cincinnatus. This painting depicts George Washington ascending to the heavens. The idea was that underneath the Rotunda, George Washington was going to be buried. He was not. He's in fact buried at Mount Vernon, but this was supposed to be a big, elaborate tomb to George Washington. And again, you guys can see the influences of Rome on American architecture, what's known as neoclassicism. This building is the Capitol building, and this is the dome, the rotunda of the Capitol. So the painting, The Apotheosis of Washington, is right up there in the ceiling. We look at the White House again with the Ionic columns and the pediments. Again, all this architecture is very indicative of ancient Greece and Rome. Again, just another outside shot of the Capitol, making that comparison from Rome to America. So, again, the decline of Rome. And I want to emphasize that these flipped classrooms in the early part of the year, we're giving you the highlights of the ancient civilizations. Theoretically, you could go to college and spend huge college classes in 14-week semesters talking about the rise of the Roman Empire or the decline of the Roman Empire. So what really happens? Well, two things happen. In the year 395 AD, Rome is split into the Western Empire, Rome, and then the Eastern Empire, Constantinople. And it's important that when we talk about the future of Europe in terms of the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, we're talking really about the western part of Europe. Western Europe goes into this problem of dark periods of time, where the eastern half of Europe and Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, they actually thrive for quite a while. So what actually happens? So Rome becomes constantly invaded by outside groups, the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons. Um, a couple things. The Angles and the Saxons are tribes from what's now England, although it was not called England at the time. The Goths and the Vandals and the Franks were Germanic tribes. They can trace or people of German heritage can trace their lineage back to these groups. Um, a lot of you guys had questions about what happens to the statues when um, they were missing arms and legs and eyes were kind of carved out. That's because the Vandals would knock them down, terrorize them, burn them, destroy them. Again, the word vandalism comes from the Vandals. So in the year 410, the city of Rome itself is sacked and attacked, and people are driven out. And in the year 476, the last of the Roman emperors is driven out. So really, by the year 500, Rome doesn't have the money to support itself. So that Pax Romana, that golden age of Rome, collapses onto itself. So as a result, people leave the empire. They leave to the countryside. And that we enter this period of what's called feudal rule or feudalism, which we're going to talk about when we study the Middle Ages. But what was once the centralized power of the Roman Empire really comes crashing down and really marks the end of the Roman Empire. So really 500 is kind of this watershed moment where it begins the Middle Ages. So from 500 to really like the 1200s, the 1300s, that's what we call the Middle Ages. But what about the East? What about the eastern half of the empire? So Constantinople continues to thrive for years. It's called the Byzantine Empire. And they actually continue on several traditions of Rome. And for a while, they actually invade Rome and take it over, only for a short amount of time. They end up splitting and they create the Eastern Orthodox religion. So if any of you are Greek Orthodox or have friends that are Greek Orthodox, that's where that comes from. And in the year 1453, the Muslim Ottomans, who are an Islamic nation, take this over and they call it Istanbul. And that marks the end of the Roman Empire as we know it. And we will study this conflict between what people call Eastern Europe and the Middle East versus Europe, because what ends up happening is that Western Europe, the Roman Empire, led by the Pope, tries to invade and retake the Holy Land. And that's going to be a source of conflict throughout the Middle Ages. That's going to spark trade. That's going to lead to the Renaissance. That's also going to lead to some of the modern problems of today. So realistically, and I know it's kind of crazy to think about, but when we talk about the decline of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, we're really talking about kind of the nature of problems today. So consider that as we study the history of Europe. All right. If you feel I went too fast, please go back, watch these notes. Some of this material will be on your test. If you have any questions, you can post them onto Edmodo. And I look forward to seeing you guys in class.